I help eliminate murder hornets in the Pacific Northwest, but there's something much worse out here. I didn't want to be a park ranger, but that's where I ended up. Sometimes you can run right into something you can do, someplace to be and stew, and it's just second nature, but you don't love it. It's just that you have nothing better to do. I just finished my 2 weeks notice, and now I'm off again. And I do hope I find something new soon. I need to warn you about the things I saw out there in the forests. What they can hide. What they can help you hide in yourself. Because if they can crop up here, they can crop up wherever. I suppose if you follow the stories, you'll start figuring out the boundaries of places you should not cross into. Whether it's the forests or somewhere in your mind. Here's one of them. Here's what happened to me. Yes, the murder hornets are terrifying. They're among the many gifts received in 2020. They're almost 2 inches long, aggressive, equipped with stingers a 1/4 inch in length, brimming with lethal venom. The sound of their wings whipping the air is pure nightmare fuel. Lost in the COVID-19 news cycles are the ecological implications of the hornets taking a foothold in the United States as an invasive species. Not only were they a direct threat to people, but they could significantly damage the population of honeybees and thus the crops dependent on them for the bees' pollination. Teams of entomologists and park rangers working under state and federal departments of agriculture have been scouring the woods of the Pacific Northwest for their nests since their arrival. So far, these teams have eliminated 3 large nests, hundreds of hornets, and thousands of larvae. Among them, most importantly, dozens of queens. Anyway, this is the little background. It was Monday, 3 weeks ago. I woke up the same way I did every day since my girlfriend and her daughter were killed. I woke up as scalding, bitter, and dark as the coffee that stained my last clean shirt and my last clean pants. I had to go into the station that way, and trust me, no one said anything to me about it. Nobody dared. I got my new assignment. These teams of experts tracked the murder hornets into my state park, and I was ordered to lead them around, show them the likely places the hornets would go. This park was hundreds of acres of dense, deciduous forest through misty, mossy, hilly terrain. I honestly didn't know where to start. Naturally, after all of a single minute surveying the various maps hung up in the ranger lodge, the lead entomologist pointed to the Devil's Mound and said with unflinching certainty that they would likely be nesting there. Even though most of us were at stay-at-home, and when we had Zoom call meetings, said they couldn't wait for an assignment, everyone else at the ranger station turned this one down. Such is the mistrust the Devil Mound breeds. We all heard the stories. They went back at least a year and a half. The eerie sounds, the eerie shadows, the feeling of being watched, even the feeling of being hunted. It went way beyond the Sasquatch stories. There were strange smells. Rangers even told me they felt the earth shake out underneath them, despite no measurable seismological or volcanic activity anywhere. Of course, it wasn't just us, the rangers. It was the campers and the hikers, too. We had to medevac a guy who said he reached the top of one of the cliff faces and was helped up by a man without a head. In his terror and panic, he plummeted to the ground and suffered a severe spine injury. A different time, a young couple came running to a patrol and told us that they had saw a dozen bodies hung from large branches along one of the adjacent trails. Naturally, when we arrived to the spot, we found no trace of bodies. The most mystifying and brutal case happened just before lockdown, when we found a middle-aged couple with a child face down on the trail for no apparent reason. We thought perhaps the virus had gotten them while they were out on the hike, but to this day, no viruses, bacteria, poison, wounds, or other reasons have emerged for why they simply dropped dead. Foul play of some kind was suspected since none of them had any ID, wallets, purses, or money of any kind on them. But then, stranger still, their bodies seemed to just disappear from the morgue. and we recovered no records of them even coming into the park. I didn't believe in that stuff, and I said that more than a few times when it came up during personal conversations and later the Zoom debriefings. I had been through the mound and up it dozens of times during my tenure, and at least 8 times since the stories started. I never saw anything, I never heard anything scarier than was already in my own mind. So the murder hornet hunt fell to me, and the eager intern, Julia Gideon, who pleaded for an exception to the stay-at-home orders to get out of the house. The entomologist team was similarly sparse, only 2, Dr. Anita Ross and her grad student Ray Dunn. While Dr. Ross and Mr. Dunn were on time, well-equipped to eliminate a nest, track additional hornets in camp, Gideon showed up just before we got into the pickup truck, with very little packed. She didn't know what she signed up for until she got there, and then she revealed that she was afraid of bees. "Bad news for you," I told her as I slapped the tailgate up and announced our departure. It would take a slow 4x4 trek to the mouth of the Devil's Mound hiking trail. From there we would be on foot only. The whole expedition was supposed to take up to 2 days. A day to get halfway around the mound, and then the second day to finish the trail loop. I had it in first and crept along the narrow, rutted trail, admiring the ghostly curtains of gray mist hanging around the trees, blotting out the sun. Dr. Anita Ross was surprisingly chatty. There was something about PhDs and entomology that made me think overrated and overpaid exterminator, and I expected her to be quiet, or at least as basic as an exterminator. She kept on talking about the hornets and about how they make nests in tree trunks and how she basically brought around a Ghostbusters trap to vacuum them out. She said they had to be studied, especially their diets and nest composition, to see how well they were adapting to the Pacific Northwest and whether the government's worst-case scenarios were justified or not. She was very enthusiastic about her job as she rattled on about how exhilarating it was to track the 3rd most venomous flying insect in the world on new terrain. And during a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic, no less. She shoved a short video of the nest eradication in my face, even though I was focused on not slipping off the misty, slick, barely present grooves of the narrow trail. "This gets everyone," she exclaimed as the video transitioned from plastic wrapping the nest to sucking out the live hornets into a clear plastic dustbuster-like bin to breaking up the nest and finding the larvae. The larvae were, I'll admit here, fairly disgusting. They looked like white, pus-filled, rubbery springs that pulsated and curled around inside the cells of the nest. I really didn't say anything, though, and I was focused on the driving as she tried to hold the phone steady in my field of vision. She shrugged and put the phone away, apparently disappointed in my lack of reaction. "You must have seen a lot. Or don't care." "Sorry," she laughed. "I'm used to getting a reaction out of people, 'cause, bugs." I'm just focused, I said back. "Yeah, sorry, you're right to be focused," she said. I figured a couple months into basically a no non-digital human contact thing, and maybe I'm a little starved for said human contact. Well, maybe if we find an actual nest, I'll be less disappointing. Scout's honor." "Of course," Anita replied. "What a Boy Scout." I stopped the truck at the end of the truck trail. The trees were taller, thicker, denser, and so was the mist. I warned everyone to make any last-minute calls or social media contacts now because the network got very spotty this point forward. Ray made some crack about the Hornets and COVID and the 5G network reception, but it didn't land how he thought it would, and no one, not even Dr. Ross, laughed. We started the trail, socially distanced the best we could. I took point and let Julia take up the rear. Anita and her student fiddled with some sort of tracking device for a tagged hornet they said probably had a nest somewhere around here. We came up upon only the first mile marker of the trail when I stopped to perform an official duty. I called Julia up to the front with me to see what I was seeing. "Holy shit!" she exclaimed as we gazed upon an ungodly number of empty beer cans, wine bottles, and liquor bottles littering the next 100 feet of the path. I pulled up my reporting app on my phone and asked her to make a report on what she was seeing. She counted at least 6 pieces of contraband. I asked her how recent this likely occurred. She came back with no immediate answer. And then I barked, "Recently! Probably within the past week, probably less." She asked me how I could tell that, and I said, "It's been wet, rainy, and most of the labels were intact, and none of them had sunk very deep into the mud." I grumbled to myself as I took photos of it all for the report. This could have happened as recently as hours ago, in fact. "Hours ago," Julia murmured, "but the park's been closed for almost 2 months. We still watch the gates. Nobody's been here." I sent an email request for backup to this location. I had a job to do, and I intended to do it. If that meant murder hornet locating, or removing a giant COVID frat party out of the park, or even just cleaning up this alcoholic trash from the trail, I was going to do it. Something was still very wrong and very strange. I kept looking for footprints or other signs that the bottles just didn't somehow rise up out of the ground itself. And I found none. Adding more to the confusion was the license plate. The Illinois license plate that made it all the way out here with no apparent vehicle tracks. It was a bent vanity plate that simply had 3 numbers on it. 141. My heart accelerated and my eyes burned red. I fell away from the forest and the assignment for just a moment. I couldn't breathe. I just wanted to somehow crumple up that license plate with my bare hands and stomp every booze container into the mud until the glass went through my boots or the license plate sliced through my hands. I didn't get the 141 at this point, but I suddenly felt like this was too much coincidence. It felt like I was being played with, and it was all coming back. The injustice of it all, the loss and the lack of closure, the urge to run, this time to the other side of the continent, struck me like a heart attack. "Hey!" Anita yelled at me as she kicked through the trash. "I've got hornets I've got to eliminate before new queens hatch and they make more nests. I'm glad you have the intense love for nature, rivaling a Keep America Beautiful ad, but I need the stoic Boy Scout from the truck right now to help me out." I slowly clawed my way out of the cave the beer cans and license plate spent me wandering into. I submitted the report and stuck the license plate into a free compartment in my bag. I took a big swig of water from my canteen and tried to lose myself in the sheets of mist. Julia said something to Anita, but I wasn't listening close enough to know what it was. There was something very soothing and cleansing about the mist wafting about and the sound of my boots crunching through the soft trail. It hit my eyes and streamed down, and I could swallow heavy in peace. I put many miles behind me with my head up in the canopy, watching birds and small rodents scurry about. The longer we hiked, the more likely the hornet we were tracking was nested on the far side of the mound. We found a clearing where someone or something etched in the sandy soil the phrase, "Hell is full," with a piece of someone's broken side view mirror. I inspected a piece of it, and it said, "Objects in mirror are deader than they appear." I put what remained of it in my sack next to the mysterious license plate I picked up earlier. We didn't find the hornets on the first leg of the hike. Night came up fast, so we made camp. 4 people, 4 tents, the protocols demanded. Honestly, I probably would have demanded it anyway. I set up the campfire. Julia and Ray roamed the edge of our campsite and seemed to bond while playing some sort of monster catching app game on their phones. I was mesmerized by the silver glitter of the misty moon streaming through the break in the canopy. Anita tossed her camp cushion over the campfire and took a seat next to me. I asked her what the verdict was, whether we were going to finish the trail or loop back the way we came. She told me that either the tracking device or the tracker on the Hornet stopped working. Anita seemed pretty indifferent about it. If it wasn't for the seemingly targeted littering, I probably would have been fine with it too. But every moment out here, I thought about the stuff that made my teeth grind. Whether they decided to come back the way we came or press blindly through the rest of the looping trail tomorrow, I just wanted this to be over, and I told her that. Then I asked her if she was worried that she had wasted a precious opportunity to smash the nest and the queens. That's the nature of it, she told me. That's the nature of nature. Sometimes it's chaotic, she said. I'm surprised a Boy Scout like you hasn't come to some sort of realization or peace about that, she continued. I felt something touch my forehead, and my first thought was it must be a mosquito, and my first instinct was to smash the little bloodsucker. Anita fanned the mosquito off my forehead and then missed clapping it in midair. It's the best part of being in entomology. You can actually squish the things that bug you. But more often than not, it's better to brush it aside before doing so. She smiled at me before looking away, somewhat embarrassed. Entomology humor, she said. Sometimes it lands, and sometimes it flies. She shrugged. Anyway, sorry about dragging you out here for nothing. Maybe you were happy we were locked down after all. I sighed. Maybe it was her face. Maybe it was just that moment in the woods. Maybe it was just, why not today be the day I open up about it? But it just wasn't. I sat there and pretended like she wasn't there. It was a long, awkward moment which only ended when Anita announced she would go find a bush. I nervously tapped my spoon on the folding camp bowl and wondered if I should just go to bed. But then I realized I was still essentially the host out here, and I needed to be up to put that fire out after everybody else went to sleep. I sat there, feeling bruised, bleeding, to the pops, whistles, and crackle of the fire, next to the symphony of insects. I stoked the fire and tossed on more branches, then sat back. I thought to myself I'd have to lean into it and feel the heat and bitter smoke leaping off of the flames. Fall asleep that way. The way I woke up. Burning. Burning, burning, burning. I leaned forward and heard Anita return. I didn't look at her or say anything to her until a few moments after she sat down and her weight fell on me. I knew she had some kind of crush on me, but this was becoming unprofessional, and I didn't want to be unprofessional or even unkind in return, even if my worsening mental circumstances, my grief, my loss, my rage. I cleared my throat, searched for the right words to reject her advance, and tried to push back against her weight. But then I noticed how cold she was. The pressure wasn't a gentle, understanding squeeze. It felt more like the dead weight of a buck resting against my back. And Anita, I don't think this is social distancing, I said as I turned into her floppiness. In one swift collapse, her body rolled off of mine and into view of the ground next to the fire. I jumped up, whipped out my flashlight, and shone it at her. I instinctively took a prone position, prepared to start first aid. With the first flutter of my flashlight beam, I returned to my standing stance in horror. It wasn't Anita. It was a woman in her late 20s with glassy, bloodshot eyes and a gaping, lifeless mouth, a crushed pelvis, and a compound fracture in her left arm. She was bleeding from the forehead with a clear skull indentation, with a piece of glass or crystal embedded just above the crater. It was a car-wrecked, mangled corpse of my deceased girlfriend, Janice. In the blur of my first involuntary blink, she was gone. Poof, the body was gone. I let out a wild groan and then choked on my dry mouth as I called out for Anita, Julia, and Ray. I was so terrified I reached for my handgun, but then I remembered we weren't carrying them during the lockdown. I pointed my flashlight behind me into the rustling bush. I called out for all of them again, and then wondered if the reinforcements I called for earlier had caught up with us, so I started calling out the names of rangers I thought would respond. I was absolutely losing my shit as I wiped my flashlight towards any sound. On the far side of the camp, I saw a shorter woman that I thought was Julia. "Julia!" I cried out. The girl lifted her head up and turned towards me. As she turned, I noticed her head was crooked on her neck, or that her neck was broken. My trembling beam reflected off bits of glass and metal embedded with bloody hair on the side of her face. I swallowed hard when I realized this wasn't Julia. It was Janice's slain daughter, Remora. In the same blink of my eye, Remora vanished. I darted into the woods after the apparition with only the flashlight to guide me. Ahead of me I saw a faint light of a campfire. I wondered if all of this was some sort of elaborate sick prank, somebody playing tricks on me by somebody who knew what had happened, somebody who found out where I went, and they were camping near us. When I reached the source of the fire, I quickly realized that I was back in my clearing, back at my campsite, back at my campfire. The fire cast an eerie reflection of the dark finger painting dripping down the sides of the small tents. Hell is full. This had to be a dream. It's not a dream. Hell is full. Didn't you see the sign? A young man's voice fluttered around me. It was not Ray's voice, or any voice I recognized. A thin figure seemed to rise up from behind the campfire. It was a male in his early 30s, wearing a Nirvana t-shirt, a faded green jacket, and ripped jeans. His face looked gaunt, seasick, and painted with dark circles under his eyes. I recognized him from the photo they printed of him in the newspaper after the accident. "Someone finally pulled the plug on you," I said. "Too bad I couldn't do it. So now you're in hell where you belong. You took everyone from me. You know that." Jack Coughlin, the man responsible for the accident, raised a bottle of whiskey to his lips and followed up with a drag off his cigarette as he stumbled around the fire and fell back into Anita's cushion. "You know, at first, I was happy to finally, Jack slid his finger across his throat. "At least in hell, you feel something. I couldn't really tell the difference between being alive and being in a coma. It was meaningless. Do this, do that, don't do this, can't do that. So hard to find that, find out that life is worth losing. But like so many things, it's just so hard to do it yourself. Then go back to hell where you belong. You killed a wonderful, smart young woman and a beautiful little girl, and you don't even care." "I wouldn't say I don't care. I was nothing until I met them. What were their names?" "Met?" I growled. "Met. Before you drunkenly slammed your truck into them? You mean just so what you can, so that you could, what, feel something then too?" "I know. I'm a sick puppy. But like so many things in life, trust me, it wasn't intentional. It was like, Jesus, take the wheel. Anyway, sorry you had to see them. He helped me out with that. Don't worry. He hasn't seen them, so far as I know. Probably that engagement ring diamond stuck in her forehead was a real kicker. Probably some guesswork on his part. Hey, you guys weren't actually engaged, right? Just like engaged to be engaged? I loved her! I loved her daughter! She was trying to do something you couldn't possibly understand. She was gonna start over, start better with me. She wasn't going around on some sort of self-destructive rampage. Oh, please. Like, she's never drove over the legal limit. Like, you've never done anything like that out of sadness or anger or for some stupid selfish fun. You're so innocent, huh? What does that have to do with anything? Everything! Jack threw up his arms. Hell is full. 141. I'm on parole. And if I find someone worse than myself, I can stay out. I figure if it's not you, then maybe it's Ray or Julia. Or maybe Dr. Anita Ross. I guess 3 more chances, but I think it's going to be you. What are you doing out here, anyway? I was running, but now I know for sure. I'm out here, and I'm going to send you back to hell. I pulled up my sleeves and stomped towards Jack. Jack flinched, threw up his hands, and turned his head away. Come on, man. Can't we just figure this out? Like, over a beer or something? He drove me into a shaking rage as my mind raced with the terrible things I wanted to do to him. Then Jack tossed his liquor bottle at my head. I ducked, with the corner just skimming my hair. In that moment of hesitation, Jack threw his small fists into my gut. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe he had that kind of strength to knock me on my ass and knock the wind out of me just like that. Jack followed up with a kick to my side before he retreated around the fire. Come on, you've been wanting to do this every waking moment of your life for the past year and a half, Jack taunted me. Send me back. Drag me into the fire. It's an express elevator down, where I belong. Jack charged me, and I shoved him aside with one arm, and then reached in for a blow to his head. He backed off and staggered a bit as blood flowed from his hairline. He looked up at me, and he smiled. He bent down and scooped up the shards of glass from the broken whiskey bottle that he threw at me, and pressed them into his head. The shards rippled in the flesh, and his head apparently totally healed from it. Too bad, he said. When I'm done with you, Anita's next. Then he charged me and knocked me down again. I reached up and tried to kick him off, but I was totally overpowered by his strength. He stepped towards the fire and grabbed me by my legs and hoisted most of my body off the ground and dragged me with just my head bouncing up and down on the ground towards the flames. Anita flashed in my mind. I felt a knot in my stomach as my feet started to burn and the flames crept up my pants, and singed hair on my leg felt like tiny little fuses igniting my terror. The mosquito and Jack. I never met Jack. I have no idea what he was like in real life. I just had this feeling that this wasn't Jack, though. This was how I thought Jack would be, how I built him up, and how I wanted him when I knocked him down, when I slapped him dead on my forehead, just like any other bloodsucker. It drove me halfway across the country. It drove me to being miserable every morning, every afternoon, every evening of my life. It brought the devil to me. I exhaled and took a breath as my boots melted and my pants smoldered. Jack Coughlin, I cried out. I forgive you! The words kind of slipped out. The burn in my legs began to subside and the knot in my stomach pulled free. At first I was in disbelief with myself. Jack wasn't worthy of it. But was I worthy of it? Was I worthy of letting go? I was. I was worthy of that. Whatever had become of the real Jack Coughlin is and still would be far worse than anything I could put him through. Yes, he made me suffer, but now I was making me suffer. So I yelled it out again. Jack Coughlin, I forgive you! Jack let me go. Then I kicked my way out of the fire and back to my camp seat. Jack, or the devil, or whatever it was, stepped back into the fire and vanished. I breathed calmer and calmer by the second. As if by magic, my boots, pants, and legs were suddenly restored to their unharmed state. Hey, Boy Scout Ranger Oberman. I jumped a bit, but then I recognized Dr. Anita Ross's voice. Fire's getting a little low. I chuckled out loud. I actually chuckled. And it felt so natural and so easy and so healthy now. Call me Tom, I said as I got up to tend to the fire. We didn't find any murder hornets on the far side of the trail. The reinforcements I called in for the initial incident never found a mound of liquor or beer bottles, and the license plate and side view mirror I recovered have since disappeared. On the walk back, I found the misty weeping forest stifling, and during that walk I resolved to resign, which of course I did. I guess I'm not running. I'm just moving on. I checked up on Jack and decided to find out what actually was happening with him. And I actually met his mother on a Zoom call. His mother was profusely apologetic for the actions of her son and Wish she had gotten him more help before he took so much life. Apparently, medically speaking, Jack was still alive. She shared a photo of his slouched over body. In a moment of candid stream of consciousness, she reported that he was dying much the way he was living, in a coma. I couldn't help but feel irritated that Jack was still somehow benefiting from his nihilism. The feed glitched for a second, and I felt a weird wave of heat blowing at my feet, and then I just let it go again. The feed glitched again, and she was crying again. It took me several times, but I eventually told her what I told the devil that night. I forgave her, and I forgave Jack again. I'm going somewhere now, and if not for the pandemic, I feel like I got a fresh start at life. Fresh starts are never easy, but it's better than drawing out a hell for yourself. Take it from me. Hell is what you make of it. Hell can be where you make it. Hell, rather than the home, can be where the heart is, and you can find yourself there with ease. And despite what hell may tell you, hell isn't full. Hell is very, very hungry.